Hello and welcome. Today we dive into the dawn of June the 6th, 1944, an event that would forever change the course of history. On that morning, as the largest naval fleet in history emerged from the fog over Normandy, a single soldier inside a reinforced bunker kept a vigilant eye on the approaching tide, unaware that cutting-edge weapons were about to turn his defenses into rubble. But what if I told you that behind these formidable fortifications, engineers had developed a weapon powerful enough to obliterate 2 meters of reinforced concrete with a single explosion? That the infamous MG-42 machine gun, known for its relentless fire of over 1,200 rounds per minute, was supported by squads carrying spare barrels and protective cover, capable of mowing down entire platoons in seconds. Or that months before the invasion, massive walls nearly 4 meters thick had been erected, meticulously designed to funnel attacking forces into deadly crossfire zones. What if the Germans believed their defenses were unbreakable, only to be blindsided by a new American tank variant, engineered specifically to survive the most intense anti-tank fire and crush their fortifications? And how did the terrifying sound of the MG-42, resembling tearing canvas, strike fear into both Allied and German soldiers alike? All these facts point to a single question. How could such a complex web of innovation, planning, and raw bravery culminate in one of the most pivotal battles in history? In this video, we will unravel the truth, separating fact from fiction and revealing the shocking reality behind the Normandy invasion. The most extraordinary moments are about to begin, and the story of that fateful morning is just getting started. On the morning of June the 6th, 1944, precisely at 6 o'clock, the rugged coastlines of Normandy bore silent witness to a momentous event that would forever alter the course of history. Amidst the dense morning fog, the largest naval fleet humbling the seas was gradually emerging from the shrouded waters of the English Channel. As this colossal armada materialized, a lone figure inside a reinforced concrete bunker, known by its designation Wider Stanza 73, kept a vigilant eye on the approaching tide. The soldier Wilhelm Krauss, a fighter pilot turned gunner, clenched his grip tightly around the handles of his formidable MG-42 machine gun, a weapon notorious for its devastating firepower and rapid rate of fire. Through the narrow embrasure of his fortified position, Krauss could see the gray, churning waters of the channel, oblivious to the formidable technological threat that lay in wait. Unbeknownst to him, British engineers had pioneered a cutting-edge weapon specifically designed to neutralize such hardened defenses in a single catastrophic strike. This weapon was a 20-pound demolition charge capable of obliterating 2 meters of reinforced concrete, rendering even the most resilient German fortifications as flimsy as cardboard. Such an attack would inevitably render the formidable structures, like the one Krauss was manning, utterly useless, especially against the advanced Churchill tanks already loading into landing craft, ready to assault the Atlantic Wall. The MG-42, often called Hitler's bus for its relentless machine gun fury, was a marvel of wartime engineering. It could unleash approximately 1,200 rounds per minute, creating overlapping fields of fire that could suppress and destroy enemy infantry with brutal efficiency. This weapon was a vital part of the German defensive doctrine, with each 10-man squad dedicated to supporting the firepower of this singular machine. These squads carried ample ammunition, spare barrels, each needing replacement after roughly 250 rounds due to overheating, and provided protective cover for the gunner, ensuring he could maintain a continuous barrage of lethal fire. When operated at full tilt, the MG-42 could mow down entire platoons within seconds, its deadly 7.92 millimeter rounds cutting through flesh, clothing, and light cover with terrifying ease. 3 months prior, in March of 1944, Krauss had observed the laborious efforts of the construction crews, mainly French conscripts and Italian prisoners, pouring enormous quantities of concrete to reinforce the defenses. Massive walls up to 3.5 meters thick on the seaward side had been erected to withstand the relentless pounding of naval shells and the might of approaching tanks. The embrasures, small, carefully angled firing slits, had been meticulously designed to offer minimal exposure to enemy fire while maximizing the field of fire, creating a deadly crossfire zone that would funnel any attacking force into preordained kill zones. The strategic importance of the site at WN-73 near La Hamel was recognized early by the German command. It was designated a key stronghold, equipped with a rare 25mm anti-tank gun, supported by multiple MG-42 nests tucked into reinforced, turreted positions. These small, fortified bunkers, resembling mushrooms scattered across the coastline, were each meticulously positioned to cover blind spots, overlapping fields of fire, and create a deadly labyrinth for any attacking infantry. The entire defensive layout was a product of intense study and planning. The Germans had learned from the disastrous Allied raid at Dieppe in August of 1942, where Canadian Churchill tanks had been halted cold on the beaches, unable to breach the formidable German defenses or climb the sea wall. Believing their reinforced fortifications made any assault on this section of the Atlantic Wall suicidal, the German command underestimated the ingenuity and determination of their enemies. They were unaware that Lieutenant J.J. Denovan, a member of the Royal Canadian Engineers, had been working tirelessly since that failed raid to develop a Churchill tank variant capable of surviving the treacherous approaches to these heavily fortified positions. His efforts, assigned under the auspices of Major General P., an unnamed but influential figure, aimed to produce a vehicle that could withstand the intense barrage of anti-tank fire and deliver a decisive blow to the German defenses. As the dawn of June 6th broke over Normandy, the stage was set for a historic clash, one where innovation, strategic planning, and sheer bravery would collide amid the chaos of war, forever etched into the annals of history as the beginning of the end for Nazi occupation in Western Europe. In the early hours of the morning, amidst the quiet anticipation of dawn, young Heinrich Seewo found himself seated at his position along the eastern flank of what the Allies called Omaha Beach, specifically at a strategic observation post overlooking Weiderstannis, a mere 5 kilometers to the east. At just 20 years of age, Henrik had been manning his machine gun, an MG-42, since before sunrise, his hands steady despite the chaos that was about to unfold. He was the son of a humble farmer, someone who, until this day, had never fired a shot in anger, never faced the terrifying reality of combat, and certainly never imagined the scale of violence that awaited him. His partner in this critical position was Lieutenant Bernhard Firking, and together they commanded a vantage point that provided a sweeping view of the entire eastern sector of the beach, an area heavily fortified and fiercely contested. The section they held was just one piece of a complex battlefield that sprawled across a stretch of coastline where the Allies aimed to break through formidable German defenses. Though the sector was designated as part of Omaha Beach, in reality the terrain and strategic positions extended into sectors where British forces from Gold Beach would also collide with the German defenses. Meanwhile, hundreds of kilometers away, the German defenders had been recently reinforced. The 352nd Infantry Division had been moved into this coastal region only weeks prior, a unit considered seasoned despite their recent arrival. They had fought on the Eastern Front, gaining a reputation as experienced and hardened troops. Yet for all their combat experience, they faced an entirely new kind of threat, an assault involving specialized armor and weaponry designed specifically to counter their well-established tactics and fortifications. This new weaponry included vehicles and tanks equipped with innovative devices meant to neutralize the advantages held by fortified machine gun nests, which had historically dominated battlefield tactics since the earliest days of modern warfare. One of the most psychologically intimidating weapons that the Germans encountered was the MG-42 machine gun. Its distinctive high-pitched ripping sound, reminiscent of tearing canvas or the scream of metal being shredded, had a profound and terrifying impact on Allied soldiers. The noise alone could cause even seasoned troops to freeze in terror, caught between the awe of its destructive power and the fear it instilled. Yet even the Germans manning these weapons harbored their own fears, particularly the infamous flamethrower tanks they had encountered earlier in the brutal fighting on the Eastern Front in Russia, where such vehicles had wrought havoc on entrenched enemy positions. However, nothing in the Germans' previous combat experiences had prepared them for the terrifying threat posed by the new American tanks and assault vehicles. These weapons could deliver devastating firepower directly into fortified positions through carefully designed firing slits, designed to be almost impervious to typical small arms fire. The mathematics behind the MG-42's devastating capacity was chillingly straightforward. With a sustained rate of fire around 150 rounds per minute, carefully regulated to prevent overheating, a single machine gun could, in theory, project 32 rounds into every square foot of the beach every 10 seconds. Such concentrated firepower had, in past engagements, succeeded in stopping advance after advance, as seen when Canadian forces were halted cold at the D-Day beaches. But this incredible volume of firepower was essentially rendered useless when faced with a new threat. A German tank capable of approaching under the cover of suppressive fire and annihilating entire defensive positions with a single shot. The Italian Gothic line, a formidable series of fortifications stretching across the Apennines, presented a similar scenario. Since the fall of 1943, the bold and seasoned Unteroffizier Bruno Hoffmann of the 1st Fallschirmjäger Division had been defending narrow mountain passes near Monte Battaglia, positions that funneled Allied forces into deadly kill zones, transforming each meter of advance into a blood-soaked battlefield. Even in these rugged mountain terrains, the British forces had begun deploying armor specially designed to withstand the relentless fire of enemy MG-42s and other weapons, allowing them to get close enough to deliver demolition charges capable of rendering fortified positions obsolete. The German paratroopers, an elite unit of soldiers who had been converted into ground fighters following their victory at Krie, had become masters of defensive warfare. They expertly positioned their MG-42s to maximize their psychological impact, creating interlocking fields of fire that forced the advancing Allies into a deadly crossfire, turning hillsides into veritable killing fields. These troops understood the importance of psychological terror and offensive efficiency, often using their weaponry and terrain to impose a brutal, attritional form of warfare that aimed to wear down and demoralize their enemies. Yet even these seasoned soldiers and cunning tactics faced an evolving menace that challenged their dominance. The introduction of specialized armor and innovative weaponry, like assault vehicles equipped with demolition capabilities, marked a new chapter in the battlefield. A chapter where traditional defenses could be shattered in moments by the relentless firepower of modern mechanized warfare. The fierce battles along the coast and in the mountain passes exemplified the brutal interplay between defensive ingenuity and soon, it became evident to all that traditional obstacles like concrete barriers and earthworks offered little real protection against the relentless onslaught of flying debris and the unpredictable projectiles hurled by the enemy. These makeshift defenses, which might have seemed formidable at first glance, proved quickly inadequate as the chaos of combat unfolded. Meanwhile, on the distant island of Okinawa, the Japanese military had been meticulously studying German military tactics, especially their well-established defensive strategies. Inspired by these lessons, Japanese engineers and military planners designed a series of highly sophisticated fortifications, creating what was essentially a layered, or defense-in-depth, system that incorporated the island's natural features. Among these features, they expanded existing natural caves into extensive underground fortresses, reinforcing them with concrete and steel to serve as secure strongholds in the face of enemy attack. Each of these subterranean bunkers and tunnels was heavily armed with Type 92 heavy machine guns, which were the Japanese equivalent of the feared German MG-42. These weapons were strategically positioned within the underground tunnels to cover all potential approaches, ensuring overlapping fields of fire that could trap and neutralize attackers. The placement was deliberate. The guns were hidden from view until the time was right, remaining concealed until American forces committed to an assault into what was considered the kill zone. The Japanese defenders had also taken lessons from German intelligence reports concerning Allied armor capabilities. They believed that their deeply buried positions, some excavated as much as 30 feet into solid rock, would be virtually immune to conventional demolition charges and aerial bombardments. However, these Japanese forces had yet to understand that the Americans had developed their own specialized weaponry designed explicitly for such fortified positions. Among these innovations were Sherman tanks modified with Navy marquee flamethrowers, capable of projecting a mixture of napalm and gasoline over distances of up to 200 yards directly into cave mouths. This deadly combination could ignite even the most well-hidden underground defenses, turning them into infernos and forcing the defenders out into the open. Back at Lou Hamel, as the morning of June 6th advanced, Krauss could clearly hear the increasing roar of naval bombardments pounding the coastline. Shells fired from British cruisers, notably the HMS Ajax and HMS Argonaut, screamed overhead in a relentless barrage. Most of these shells impacted behind Krauss's position, failing to penetrate the thick concrete walls that shielded his machine gun emplacement. This gave him a fleeting sense of confidence, fostering the false impression that the Atlantic Wall, whatever its vulnerabilities, would hold firm as Rommel had assured him. Yet with each passing moment, Krauss couldn't help but notice that the preliminary bombardment seemed somewhat lighter than expected. It was almost as if the Allies were intentionally holding back their destructive power, preserving the beach defenses for an eventual assault rather than aiming for complete destruction in the initial strikes. Seated beside him were his gun crew, Gerrit Miller operating the loader and aiming the gun, while Schutz Wagner managed the ammunition supply. These men had been trained to perform a critical and demanding task, changing the overheated barrel of the MG-42 in less than 20 seconds. This skill was vital because the weapon's tendency to overheat could cause dangerous jams or even total failure during battle, creating deadly gaps in their defensive line. Despite their expertise, neither Muller nor Wagner suspected that their positions might only endure for hours rather than days before the relentless enemy fire or the inevitable breakthrough. At precisely 7:25 hours, the first wave of British troops from the 51st Infantry Division began landing on Gold Beach, initiating the assault. Krauss immediately opened fire with his MG-42, unleashing what it was designed to do: rapid, controlled bursts of deadly fire that cut down wave after wave of soldiers from the 1st Hampshire Regiment as they struggled through the surf and sand. Each burst was carefully calibrated to prevent jamming or overheating. He fired 7 to 10 rounds at a time, methodically sweeping the beach with relentless precision. His focus was entirely on his sector of fire, with no awareness of the specialized tanks being unloaded just beyond his field of vision, tanks that would soon play a crucial role in the battle. The British forces had learned from previous engagements and intelligence reports that ordinary tanks were vulnerable once they arrived at the beach. To counter this, the Churchill AVREs assigned to support the Gold Beach assault had been fitted with additional armor plating on their frontal sections, making them more resilient against enemy fire. Some reports claimed that these heavily armored tanks could withstand direct hits from the feared 88mm anti-tank guns, some of the most powerful weapons used during the period. Their real strength, however, lay in their ability to suppress enemy defenses from a distance, providing covering fire while approaching enemy positions and thus clearing the way for infantry to land and advance further inland. This combination of firepower and protection was instrumental in gradually breaking down the formidable defenses arrayed along the beaches, leading to the eventual breach of what had seemed like impenetrable fortified positions. Under the overcast sky, the battlefield stretched endlessly, a bleak tableau of destruction and chaos. Behind the main defensive line, in a concealed reserve bunker, stood Offizier Henrik Knob, an officer of the 325th Infantry Division. His training had been meticulous. He had spent countless hours studying recognition cards designed to help identify various Allied tank types swiftly and accurately. These cards, filled with detailed images and specifications, were crucial tools for soldiers like him, tasked with defending their positions against the relentless assault of Allied armored units. But as the first Churchill AVRE tanks rolled forward from the beaches beyond, Henrik found himself momentarily stunned by their peculiar appearance. Their short, stocky forms, complemented by wide-bore guns that looked almost comically exaggerated, bore no resemblance to the more familiar and streamlined shapes of the Shermans or the standard Churchill tanks he had studied. The weapons mounted on these vehicles were short and thick, giving them an almost toy-like quality when compared to the long-barreled anti-tank guns that the Germans preferred. Guns which had once seemed intimidating and formidable. These unfamiliar tanks seemed almost out of place amid the chaos of battle, their stubby guns a puzzling sight for the seasoned officer. The AVRES, or Armored Vehicle Royal Engineers, were armed with weapons so unusual they appeared almost whimsical, yet they were devastating in their purpose. The Petard mortar, a special piece of engineering marvel designed by Colonel Blacker, was mounted on these vehicles. Colonel Blacker had previously crafted the Blacker Bombard, a spigot mortar system used by the Home Guard, which relied on a massive spring capable of absorbing 20 tons of recoil energy. This ingenious mechanism allowed the mortar to automatically recock itself after firing, enabling it to launch a 40-pound demolition charge with remarkable accuracy. The charge could pierce through the toughest defenses, such as bunker embrasures, from distances up to 80 yards, turning these seemingly cumbersome vehicles into formidable siege engines. The British assault engineers of the 79th Armored Division had undergone rigorous training at their assault school in Sussex. There, they had constructed mock-ups of German bunkers, meticulously practicing their approach tactics. They learned to coordinate seamlessly with infantry units and main battle tanks to suppress enemy defensive positions effectively. Their goal was to clear the path for the AVRES, which would then move into firing positions to unleash their destructive payloads. This coordinated effort was a form of deadly choreography, one that turned the Germans' own defensive doctrine against them by exploiting their predictable fields of fire. The engineers planned their advances carefully, using cover and suppression to approach their targets with precision. Each AVRE was crewed by a team of 6 men. This crew included 5 Royal Engineers, trained in demolition and engineering tasks, and a Royal Armored Corps driver responsible for maneuvering the vehicle. Among them was a dedicated demolition non-commissioned officer, NCO, who held the critical task of preparing the charges for the petard mortar. The most perilous job, however, belonged to the co-driver. Exposing his hands and arms through a sliding hatch, he had to carefully break open the weapon, like wielding a giant shotgun, to insert the next 40-pound round. During this frantic process, the vehicle would be under enemy fire. Machine guns would spark and rattle against the armor, adding a layer of danger and chaos to each reload. Meanwhile, at Wider Stannis 36, near Nelsfeld-Webel, Autotor, commanding an MG-42 machine gun position, reported to his battalion headquarters that his weapon had fired over 3,000 rounds during the initial hour of the invasion. His crew was exhausted but relentless, having burned through 3 spare barrels amidst the din and chaos of combat. The bunker's concrete floor was cluttered with spent brass casings that clinked and rolled underfoot, a testament to the relentless barrage of fire. As he kept watch, Autotor's attention was drawn to an approaching Churchill tank, bearing what appeared to be a bundle of logs mounted on its front. A strange sight that momentarily paused his thoughts. The carrier was another variant of the AVRE, specifically designed to deploy bundles of wood and brushwood into anti-tank ditches, transforming them into makeshift crossings. This was a vital element of the assault, enabling infantry and vehicles to traverse obstacles in the rapidly changing battlefield landscape. However, Autotor was unaware of the true purpose of these tanks. He did not realize that they carried the dreaded petard mortars. His first indication that something was terribly wrong came when the tank halted at a distance of precisely 80 yards from his position and its stubby gun steadily elevated toward his embrasure, hinting at an imminent threat. Later, Major Peter Sellery of the Sherwood Rangers Yeomanry, who was supporting the British 8th Armored Brigades as they pushed inland from Gold Beach, would describe observing an AVRE in action. He watched as the tank, with its unusual appearance and formidable armament, engaged in a deadly dance with the main strength of the British assault lay in their innovative and formidable engineering vehicles, notably the Churchill AVRE, which proved to be a game-changer during the invasion. I recall witnessing an instance when I ordered one of these specialized tanks equipped with a petard demolitions device to target a heavily fortified house. As the vehicle moved forward, a small, seemingly insignificant object resembling a miniature flying dustbin was launched toward the structure. This small but deadly projectile struck just above the front entrance of the house, triggering a catastrophic collapse that resembled a deck of cards tumbling down in quick succession. The explosion caused the entire building to disintegrate, sending debris, along with the defending German soldiers armed with machine guns, anti-tank weapons, and a torrent of bricks, spilling out into the open courtyard below. This scene was not just a display of destructive power, but a vivid illustration that failed to fully convey the sheer horror experienced by the German defenders witnessing such a weapon in action. The immediate psychological impact was profound and far-reaching. News of this devastating weapon spread rapidly along the German defensive line, creating a wave of fear and uncertainty. Soldiers realized that the British possessed a weapon capable of destroying reinforced concrete positions with a single well-placed shot. Such knowledge caused panic among some crews manning the formidable MG-42 machine guns, leading to their abandonment of posts rather than face the certainty of death when an AVRE approached. The projectile that caused this destruction was officially designated as the #1 demolition bomb, a remarkable piece of military engineering. It was a projectile measuring about 636 millimeters in length, with a diameter of 230 millimeters. Filled with approximately 40 pounds of high explosive, it was capable of penetrating 2 meters of reinforced concrete, or, more commonly, entering through an embrasure and detonating inside a bunker. When it did so, the results were catastrophic, transforming a confined space into a death trap. The blast wave, reflected and intensified by the concrete walls, amplified the destructive effect, causing maximum damage within the entombed space and turning fortified positions into ruins. German forces had some experience with demolition charges before, particularly the satchel charges used by their combat engineers. However, those charges required soldiers to approach enemy positions on foot under fire, manually placing explosives in close proximity to the target. This was a near-suicidal task, especially when facing well-defended MG-42 positions. By contrast, the AVRE's ability to deliver equivalent destructive power from a safer distance was revolutionary. The armor on these vehicles could withstand everything short of a direct hit from an 88mm gun, allowing engineers to operate with a significant degree of safety while demolishing fortified defenses. By the early morning hours of D-Day, precisely around 8 o'clock, the first AVREs had already come into action along the beaches where British and Canadian troops were landing. The 5th Assault Regiment of the Royal Engineers was supporting the 51st Division at Gold Beach, tasked with breaching heavily fortified German defenses. Simultaneously, the 6th Assault Regiment was operating alongside the 3rd Canadian Division at Juno Beach, and the 42nd Assault Regiment was supporting the 3rd British Division at Sword Beach. Each regiment deployed dozens of these specialized Churchill tanks, systematically targeting and neutralizing German strongpoints that had been perceived as virtually impregnable. Within the first 3 hours of the invasion, the 26th Assault Squadron, supporting the Canadian advance at Juno Beach, destroyed no fewer than 6 major concrete bunkers. Among these was the notorious bunker known as Charlie Havre, commanded by Lieutenant Bill Dunn. This particular fortification was a critical obstacle, and its destruction was vital to opening a clear exit from the beach for the advancing troops. Unfortunately, the tank became trapped in a shell crater and had to be abandoned, but not before its crew demonstrated vividly the destructive potential of the Petard mortar against German fortifications. At the strategic location of Lou Hamel, a fierce stand was taking place. Krauss's MG-42 had been decimating British troops for hours, creating a bottleneck that threatened to halt the entire western flank of Gold Beach's advance. The situation was dire, with casualties mounting rapidly. Company C of the 1st Hampshire Regiment had been pinned down since early morning, around 7:30, suffering horrific losses as they attempted to flank the German position. Major Warren assumed command after Lieutenant Colonel Nelson was incapacitated, and the troops desperately sought a breakthrough amid the relentless enemy fire. In this intense and chaotic context, the effectiveness of the AVRE and its Petard mortar became a symbol of ingenuity and resilience. These specialized vehicles not only provided a powerful means of breaching seemingly impregnable defenses, but also significantly boosted the morale of the attacking forces, demonstrating that even the most formidable obstacles could be overcome through a combination of engineering excellence and courageous ingenuity. Captain Smith had sustained a painful wound during the relentless fighting, yet the strategic situation demanded a difficult decision. The order was made to maneuver around the formidable German defenses and launch a surprise attack from behind, a move that, under the relentless barrage of enemy fire, would cost precious hours and test even the most seasoned troops' resolve. The German defenses at Lowell were especially daunting. They featured a heavily fortified position topped by a sturdy 75mm gun casemate, which was aimed eastward to deliver enfilading fire along the shoreline. This formidable emplacement was protected by a concrete wall nearly 3.5 meters thick on the seaward side, making it virtually impenetrable from frontally directed assaults. Surrounding buildings housed multiple MG-42 machine gun positions, creating a dense network of interlocking fields of fire. This setup made any attempt to approach the bunker a perilous endeavor, effectively turning the area into what one British soldier later described as a complete and utter killing ground, an environment where survival seemed impossible in the face of such concentrated and lethal defenses. By mid-afternoon, at precisely 3 o'clock in the afternoon, an AVRE, Armored Vehicle Royal Engineers, from the 82nd Assault Squadron finally succeeded in navigating into a strategic position. It advanced carefully under the cover of suppressive fire from Shermans belonging to the Westminster Dragoons, which provided much-needed protection from the relentless German gunfire. The driver expertly maneuvered the heavily armored vehicle through a debris-strewn landscape filled with craters, while the vehicle's commander coordinated supporting infantry units to keep the German machine gun suppressed, creating just enough distraction and chaos. This allowed the massive Churchill tank to inch closer into range, its heavy silhouette looming over the battlefield. The tank's commander, Sergeant James Patterson, a coal miner from Durham who had volunteered for the Royal Engineers, took precise control of the vehicle's turret. He carefully aimed it so that the stubby petard mortar was aligned precisely with the embrasure of the bunker, where Krauss's MG-42 had been spitting death continuously for the past 8 hours. The German gunner inside was still firing desperate bursts, oblivious to the imminent danger, as the approaching infantry advanced just beyond the reach of his suppressive fire. Suddenly, the first petard round struck the concrete just above the embrasure with a deafening explosion that reverberated across the battlefield, shaking the entire bunker structure. Fragments of reinforced concrete flew outward like deadly shrapnel, tearing through the air in a deadly spray. Though the bunker itself was not penetrated by this initial blast, the force of the explosion created a shock wave so powerful that everyone inside was stunned, momentarily disoriented by the deafening noise and flying debris. Meanwhile, Patterson's loader, Sapper Tommy Clark, a seasoned soldier and skilled demolition expert, had already begun preparing the next round. With practiced efficiency, despite the constant crackle of machine gun fire ricocheting off the tank's armor, Clark swiftly opened the mortar to load another round, a dust-covered shell he called a flying dust bin. The second petard round was launched with deadly precision, piercing through the embrasure and detonating directly inside the bunker with apocalyptic force. The 40 pounds of high explosives compressed within the confined space resulted in a devastating overpressure, rupturing eardrums and collapsing lungs. The concrete walls, which had served as a shield, transformed into a deafening echo chamber, amplifying the destruction. The explosion was so intense that Krauss and his entire crew were killed instantly, their positions obliterated in an instant. The force of the blast cracked the very foundations of the bunker and shattered its interior, leaving nothing intact. It was a decisive blow that effectively neutralized the main German defensive position in that sector, dramatically shifting the momentum of the attack. At exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the same AVRE fired a third petard round, targeting the rear entrance of the main casemate at Lou Hamill's strongpoint. This final strike delivered a forceful explosion that silenced the vicious 75mm gun once and for all, a weapon that had wreaked havoc along the beach all day. The blast was so powerful that it caused chaos among the surrounding German positions. Soldiers in nearby trenches and bunkers, witnessing the destruction, abandoned their weapons and retreated in panic toward the village. Many fled into the narrow streets, seeking refuge, only to be hunted down in the fierce house-to-house fighting that continued deep into the evening. The destruction of the main bunker was a turning point. It effectively shattered the backbone of the German defenses in that area, yet the psychological impact of the attack rippled across the entire line. News of the brutal, decisive blow spread quickly among the German troops, leaving survivors shaken and demoralized. The intense destruction and the swift, relentless assault had dealt a severe blow to their confidence, and although pockets of resistance remained, the strategic advantage had clearly shifted in favor of the attacking forces. During the tumultuous years of the Second World War, a remarkable technological development by the British forces revolutionized the battlefield. striking fear into the hearts of defenders across multiple fronts. Rumors persisted about a new type of tank capable of unleashing a single, devastating shot potent enough to obliterate any bunker, no matter how strongly fortified. Such a weapon would render traditional defensive positions obsolete, forcing defenders to reconsider their entire strategy. The mere mention of these tanks caused widespread panic among the crews operating the formidable MG-42 machine guns, who had been led to believe that their concrete fortifications, meticulously constructed and thought to be virtually impervious, would serve as an unbreakable shield against any Allied assault. The realization that these bunkers could be destroyed with a single shot, rendering months of careful construction pointless, sent shockwaves through the defensive lines, transforming what was once perceived as a safe haven into a death trap. Meanwhile, in Italy, the German forces entrenched along the formidable Gothic line received increasingly alarming reports of the Allied landings in Normandy. As news of the D-Day invasion spread, the Germans became more anxious, especially upon hearing accounts of specialized British tanks equipped with extraordinary destructive capabilities. These tanks could swiftly neutralize well-fortified positions, making traditional defenses vulnerable. The reports prompted Generalfeldmarschal Albert Kesselring to urgently seek detailed intelligence about these new British weapons, understanding that their emergence could dramatically shift the already fragile balance of power. By that point, however, it was already too late for the Germans to develop effective countermeasures in time. Their engineers could only advise dispersing defensive positions widely and avoiding concentrated strongpoints, which the new tanks could potentially eliminate with a single lucky shot. The morale of the Italian Social Republic forces fighting alongside the Germans plummeted even further upon hearing these reports. Having already witnessed the devastating effectiveness of Allied specialized armor during the breakthrough at Cassino, where British Churchill Crocodile flamethrower tanks had systematically burned out fortified positions that had stood for months, their spirits were shattered. These terrifying flamethrower tanks, which the troops ominously nicknamed Blowtorch and Corkscrew, worked in deadly tandem with armored engineering vehicles, known as Assault Vehicles Royal Engineers, creating a horrifying combination that proved utterly destructive. Far across the vast Pacific theater, on the island of Okinawa, the Japanese military studied German defensive tactics through their military attaché in Berlin, initially dismissing reports of Allied bunker-busting tanks as mere propaganda. They believed that their extensive cave fortifications, carved deep into solid rock, would stand impregnable against any form of demolition or armor-piercing weaponry. However, by April of 1945, the Japanese forces faced an unrelenting nightmare. American Sherman tanks, modified with flamethrowers supplied by the Navy's Chemical Biological Warfare Service, systematically and mercilessly burned out their positions. These modified tanks, designated CWS-PAH-4, could project intense flames with deadly precision up to 200 yards. But their most terrifying weapon was the ability to fire wet shots of unignited gasoline, fuel that would seep deep into the cave systems before being ignited, igniting devastating firestorms. The mixture, a lethal concoction flowing like liquid death, consumed oxygen and generated temperatures soaring over 1,000 degrees Celsius, incinerating everything within its reach. The Japanese had stationed machine guns, specifically Type 92 and Type 96 models, at the entrances of these caves. These machine guns, capable of firing at nearly 500 rounds per minute, were carefully concealed within cave mouths that guarded approaches to critical terrain features, creating deadly kill zones. These zones forced American infantry to urgently call for specialized armored support, leading to the deployment of the entire 713th Tank Battalion, a unit entirely converted into flamethrower tanks stationed at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii. Colonel Yahara's defensive strategy for Okinawa was based on lessons learned from the German experiences in Europe. His plan involved creating multiple defensive lines with mutually supporting strongpoints designed to continue resisting even if individual fortifications were breached or destroyed. Despite this well-thought-out approach, he had not anticipated the profound psychological impact that flamethrower tanks would have on his troops. Many Japanese soldiers, faced with the terrifying prospect of being burned alive, chose suicide over surrender when American Shermans approached their positions. The American tanks, designated CWS-PAH-4, by the Chemical Warfare Service in the Pacific Ocean area, Hawaii, could accurately project their deadly flame streams up to 200 yards. Even more terrifying was their secondary capability, firing wet, unignited fuel that would seep into the depths of cave systems, igniting horrific firestorms that consumed everything within their reach and left nothing untouched by the inferno. This terrifying evolution of warfare demonstrated how technological innovation, particularly in the form of specialized flamethrower tanks, had altered the very nature of combat, instilling terror in the defenders and reshaping the strategies employed by both sides across multiple theaters. The battlefield was a chaotic scene of destruction and confusion, where tactics that seemed revolutionary, even to seasoned soldiers, were rapidly evolving amidst the relentless pressure of combat. Among these innovations was a particular strategy that proved so effective that it caused even the most steadfast Japanese troops, sworn to defend their positions to the very end, to abandon their posts in a desperate attempt to escape the devastating onslaught. This tactic, which exploited the weaknesses of traditional defensive structures and the limitations of conventional weaponry, fundamentally changed the dynamics of ground warfare. Meanwhile, across the vast expanse of Normandy on D-Day's afternoon, German military commanders found themselves increasingly overwhelmed by alarming reports from the front lines. These reports painted a picture of a new and formidable threat: British tanks equipped with short-barreled, wide-caliber guns that demonstrated remarkable destructive power. These armored vehicles were systematically dismantling bunkers, fortified positions that had taken months, sometimes even years, to construct and reinforce. The bunkers, designed to withstand prolonged artillery bombardments and infantry assaults, were now being obliterated with astonishing ease. One commanding officer, General Major Wilhelm Krauss, who led the 716th Infantry Division, personally witnessed an example of this destructive capability. He observed a specialized assault vehicle, an AVRE, or Armored Vehicle Royal Engineers, destroy a Tobruk-style bunker with a single precise shot. The bunker, made of reinforced concrete and intended to be nearly impervious to standard artillery, simply vanished beneath a cloud of dust and debris, a testament to the devastating effectiveness of the new weapon. In response to this emerging threat, the general immediately contacted his superiors at Rommel's headquarters to report the situation. However, the chain of command was hampered by delays and miscommunications. The German High Command was still preoccupied with celebrations in Germany, where the Field Marshal was reveling in his wife's birthday festivities. During this time, weather forecasts had painted a bleak picture, convincing many in leadership that the weather conditions would be too unfavorable for an invasion to proceed. Consequently, the response from the German military was fragmented and disorganized, with individual commanders attempting to adapt on their own to the unfamiliar and highly effective new weapon systems without a cohesive strategy. As the battle raged on, the crews manning the MG-42 machine guns, the backbone of German infantry firepower, found themselves in increasingly perilous situations. Those who survived the initial assault were forced to retreat to secondary defensive positions. Unfortunately, these hastily prepared fallback defenses offered little real protection against the advancing AVRES, which could simply drive up to them and unleash their petard mortars at point-blank range. These massive demolition charges, designed for engineering and demolitions rather than direct combat, turned machine gun nests into craters in an instant. Entire squads could be wiped out in a single devastating blast, as the shockwave propagated through the trench systems and destroyed everything in its path. German military doctrine at the time had placed immense emphasis on the MG-42 machine gun as the centerpiece of infantry tactics. Riflemen were often viewed primarily as carriers of ammunition and as operators of the machine guns themselves, barrel changers and support personnel, rather than independent combatants. This intense focus on a single weapon system created a significant vulnerability when faced with an enemy capable of neutralizing that weapon with a single well-placed demolition charge. The reliance on concentrated firepower in one key piece of equipment meant that once it was destroyed, the entire defensive posture could be compromised. At the infamous location known as Widerstandsstelle, Stannis 62, a particularly fierce battle took place. There, Heinrich Sello had been firing his MG-42 continuously for 9 hours straight, later claiming to have discharged 12,000 rounds and inflicted over 1,000 casualties. While these figures were likely exaggerated, an understandable distortion caused by the fog of war and the trauma of combat, they nonetheless reflected the intense and relentless nature of the fighting in that sector. Eventually, American forces from the 16th Infantry Regiment managed to breach Sello's position at approximately 8:25 in the morning. Their success was not achieved through the use of specialized armor or powerful artillery, but rather through sheer numbers, relentless determination, and tactical perseverance. Sello himself managed to survive the encounter by abandoning his post once his ammunition was exhausted. Many years later, his account would be published, stirring controversy due to his claims of single-handedly halting the American advance. Regardless of the accuracy of such assertions, it remains undeniable that the MG-42 positions at Widerstandsstelle 62, as well as other strategic strongpoints along Omaha Beach, held out longer than those facing British troops. This was largely because the American forces had rejected the use of certain specialized engineering vehicles, sometimes called funnies, including the AVRES, crocodile flamethrower tanks, and other equipment that proved highly effective against fortified positions. The decision made by General Omar Bradley to decline most of these specialized armor assets, accepting only the duplex-drive DD amphibious tanks, has been widely criticized by historians. In the initial days of the invasion, American military casualties soared to over 2,000, a staggering toll that underscored the fierce resistance faced by Allied forces. Many of these casualties resulted from well-fortified German MG-42 machine gun positions, which frustratingly could have been swiftly neutralized through the use of petard mortars, small but powerful explosive devices capable of breaching fortified defenses with relative ease. Despite the availability of such effective weapons, the prevailing American military strategy relied heavily on traditional combined arms tactics. This approach involved meticulously coordinated efforts among infantry units, artillery batteries, and standard tanks, all working in unison to suppress enemy fire and destroy defensive positions. However, this method came at a high cost. Soldiers were often forced to launch direct assaults against well-entrenched German positions, leading to heavy casualties that might have been substantially reduced if simpler, more targeted means of destruction had been employed earlier. In stark contrast, the German defenders, particularly the British forces on the coast, were increasingly able to use their specialized engineering equipment to demolish or neutralize threats before they could cause significant damage. For example, the British employed large 40-pound demolition charges, petards, that could eradicate enemy bunkers and fortified points with minimal risk to soldiers, effectively bypassing protracted assaults that would otherwise have led to considerable loss of life. The German High Command's attempts to counter the emerging threat of specialized Allied armor, including the formidable AVRE, Armored Vehicle Royal Engineers, were severely hampered by internal structural issues. Their rigid hierarchical command framework, combined with frequent disruptions of communication lines, caused both by Allied air superiority and sabotage efforts orchestrated by French resistance fighters, meant many German units remained unaware of the precise capabilities and movements of these advanced vehicles until they were already under attack. This lack of timely intelligence led to chaos and disorientation among German troops, who had previously believed their defenses to be nearly invulnerable. Suddenly, weapons once regarded as impregnable, such as reinforced concrete bunkers and fortified positions, became death traps that could be dismantled with relative ease by the specialized Allied engineering vehicles. Field Marshal Gerd von Reunet, who commanded all German forces in the Western Theater, later reflected that the appearance of armor capable of defeating concrete fortifications effectively rendered much of their defensive strategy obsolete. He acknowledged that the emergence of such specialized vehicles invalidated the entire concept of static, heavily fortified defenses meant to slow the enemy's advance. Nevertheless, von Reunet was also candid in noting that, even if the Germans had been aware of these new threats earlier, they lacked the resources necessary to develop effective countermeasures or adapt their existing defenses accordingly. The technological and logistical constraints simply did not permit a timely or adequate response. By the end of the first day, June the 6th, British forces had made significant gains inland from their initial landing point at Gold Beach, having advanced nearly 10 kilometers. Their progress was facilitated by the destruction or capture of numerous German strongpoints, aided significantly by the use of AVRES and other specialized armored vehicles. These engineering marvels proved particularly effective in the challenging terrain of Normandy, allowing the British to clear pathways through heavily fortified lines with relative speed and efficiency. Meanwhile, at Omaha Beach, American forces struggled to establish a foothold amid overwhelming opposition. They suffered catastrophic casualties while attempting to assault well-defended German positions that, as later proved, could have been eliminated with a single Petar round, an explosive device capable of breaching even the most formidable defenses with precision. The stark contrast between the two beaches did not escape the notice of U.S. military leaders. Recognizing the potential of these specialized vehicles, within mere weeks, American commanders began requesting support from their British allies to deploy AVRES during subsequent operations targeting German defenses. However, the limited number of these specialized vehicles meant that, throughout the campaign, they remained largely in the hands of British and Commonwealth forces, with the Americans relying on other tactics and equipment. The psychological impact of the AVRE, often referred to colloquially as the flying dustbin, extended far beyond its physical destructive power. Even soldiers who had never seen these vehicles in action were profoundly affected by the mere rumor of their approach. German troops, believing the AVRE to be nearly invincible, started abandoning their fortified positions at the slightest hint of its presence. This phenomenon created a domino effect, eroding morale and causing many units to retreat or surrender prematurely. The effectiveness of this psychological warfare significantly undermined the entire concept of the Atlantic Wall, a formidable network of concrete fortifications designed to withstand prolonged assaults. The assumption that these defenses could hold out long enough for mobile German reserves to counterattack was rapidly proven false, as the Allies exploited the weaknesses exposed by their specialized engineering vehicles. The MG-42 machine gun, which had served as the cornerstone of German defensive tactics since 2042, suddenly appeared outdated in the face of the new threats. Enemy units equipped with AVRES could neutralize the gun and its entire crew with a single shot fired from. In the midst of relentless combat, Allied forces developed a devastating new tactic involving specialized armored vehicles known as AVRES, which could be stealthily deployed from concealed positions. These armored vehicles, equipped with powerful demolitions and capable of firing from hidden spots, revolutionized battlefield engagements by allowing sudden, precise strikes on enemy bunkers, pillboxes, and fortified structures. The Germans, having learned through experience that the thick frontal armor of these AVRES made them nearly impervious from the front, recognized that their defenses were vulnerable from the sides and rear. By the end of June in the year 1944, the records from the 79th Armored Division's War Diary vividly documented that these specialized vehicles had succeeded in destroying over 400 German defensive positions. These included a wide array of fortified bunkers, pillboxes, and reinforced buildings that dotted the battlefield. Each of these successful demolitions was more than just a tactical victory. It often meant saving many lives, as traditional assaults on such heavily fortified positions had historically resulted in significant casualties among attacking troops. The innovative use of AVRES thus proved to be a crucial factor in reducing the human cost of advancing through entrenched enemy lines. In response to this emerging threat, German military strategists attempted to adapt their defensive tactics. They issued orders to their troops to place machine gun positions, particularly MG-42s, not in tightly grouped, easily targeted strongpoints, but rather to spread them out across a broader area and sight them in depth. This dispersal aimed to prevent the Allies from destroying multiple weapons with a single explosive charge or coordinated attack. However, this approach had a double-edged consequence. While it made it harder for the Allies to eliminate large sections of firepower at once, it inadvertently weakened the overall defensive strength. These more scattered positions became more susceptible to conventional infantry assaults, creating a complex and troubling tactical dilemma for the defenders, who found it difficult to strike a balance between dispersal and defense's resilience. Some German commanders attempted a more inventive, albeit desperate measure, by repurposing captured French tanks as mobile fortifications. They would bury these tanks so that their turrets were below the ground level, transforming them into makeshift bunkers that could be quickly moved as needed. These improvised defensive structures were meant to serve as hardened firing points, providing cover and firepower, while offering some degree of mobility. Unfortunately, these hastily assembled fortifications proved even more vulnerable to specialized weapons such as petard mortars. These mortars, with their ability to penetrate thinner armor, could detonate inside the confined space of the reburied tanks, resulting in catastrophic damage and lethal consequences for those defending behind them. Across the Mediterranean theater, particularly along the German-held Gothic line in Italy, similar adaptive efforts were underway. German forces, recognizing the difficulty of maintaining traditional, massive concrete fortifications, began to favor dispersed positions that utilized the natural terrain. They would hide behind hills, forests, and other landscape features, relying on the cover of darkness to conduct patrols and small-scale ambushes. These tactics aimed to make it more challenging for British and Indian troops to locate and destroy their defenses, especially since the enemy's infiltration tactics allowed them to slip between positions and attack from unexpected angles, often under the cover of night. Meanwhile, the Italian Republican forces, those loyal to Mussolini's regime, found themselves increasingly demoralized. The fall of Rome and the evident futility of their cause weighed heavily on morale. But what further sapped their resolve was the alarming news of the Allies' so-called wonder weapons. Entire battalions chose to surrender rather than face the terrifying combination of AVRES and the Churchill crocodile flamethrowers, which had become infamous among the Axis troops. These terrifying incendiary devices, dubbed collectively as the IO tribe Britannis, or the British monsters, symbolized the destructive power wielded by the Allies and contributed to the perception that resistance was both futile and deadly. On the Eastern Front, the situation was equally dire. The German Wehrmacht was engaged in a desperate defensive struggle against the Soviet summer offensive, known as Operation Bagration. German commanders were increasingly alarmed to observe that Soviet troops were deploying their own specialized armor and weapons, mirroring the innovations seen on the Western Front. The T-34 tanks were being modified with mine rollers to clear obstacles, while the KV series tanks were being converted into flamethrowers, explicitly a sign that the Soviets, like their Western counterparts, were sharing technological innovations and tactical ideas. This rapid proliferation of specialized Soviet armor suggested that the Allied and Soviet forces were increasingly exchanging effective tactics and technological advances, making the battlefield even more dangerous for the Germans. By the autumn of 1944, the nightmare of facing bunker-busting tanks and heavily armed vehicles in multiple sectors had become a stark reality. The once formidable German defenses found themselves stretched beyond their limits, unable to contain the relentless pressure from multiple fronts, which in turn contributed significantly to the swift and catastrophic collapse of the Third Reich. Meanwhile, throughout the course of the Second World War, military strategists and combat engineers became increasingly aware of the vulnerabilities inherent in static defensive positions, especially those fortified with formidable weapons like the German MG-42 machine gun. Despite the relentless efforts of the Japanese forces at Okinawa to create what was arguably the most sophisticated defensive network in the Pacific Theater, even these seemingly impregnable systems proved to be tragically vulnerable when confronted with modern, specialized assault equipment, particularly American flamethrower tanks. The Japanese 22nd Army, under the command of Lieutenant General Ushima Mitsuru, had painstakingly constructed an extensive and intricate labyrinthine network of over 60 miles of tunnels, meticulously carved deep into the limestone bedrock. These tunnels interconnected defensive positions, each carefully positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire, all carefully concealed until the moment of attack, giving the impression of an impenetrable fortress designed to withstand any assault. This elaborate subterranean defensive system was a testament to Japanese ingenuity and strategic planning, embodying a level of sophistication that suggested it might be virtually impossible for an invading force to breach its defenses without catastrophic losses. The defensive network was intended to serve as a virtually impregnable stronghold, capable of deterring or annihilating any enemy advance. Yet despite this formidable appearance, the arrival of the American 29th Tank Battalion, with 54 Sherman tanks converted into flamethrowers, transformed these seemingly invincible defenses into scenes of utter devastation. These specialized tanks unleashed torrents of fire that flowed like water through the tunnels and air shafts, following every passage, turning the extensive network into a deadly maze of flames that consumed entire units in walls of fire. The effectiveness of these flamethrower tanks in Okinawa vividly demonstrated a critical tactical lesson, that even the best-designed static defenses could be rendered obsolete by the advent of specialized mobile weaponry. This shift in battlefield dynamics was corroborated by German intelligence reports transmitted through their embassy in Tokyo prior to Japan's surrender, which confirmed their worst fears about the diminishing value of fixed defensive positions. One such report explicitly noted that the Americans had perfected a method akin to what the British had begun at Normandy, namely the systematic use of specialized armor to neutralize heavily fortified positions. These new tactics involved armored vehicles equipped with flamethrowers and other destructive tools, capable of targeting and destroying entrenched defenses with devastating efficiency, turning what was once considered a defensive advantage into a death trap. This realization marked a bitter acknowledgement of a fundamental tactical failure. The German MG-42 machine gun, which had been heralded as one of the most effective infantry weapons of its time, capable of dominating a battlefield from the deserts of North Africa all the way to the icy Arctic, found itself rendered nearly irrelevant in the face of these new assault tactics. Instead of serving as a shield of steel and firepower, the MG-42 and similar fixed positions were systematically neutralized by specialized vehicles that could bypass or destroy them with relative ease. The arrival of the flamethrower tanks, or flying dustbins, as they were colloquially called due to their appearance, epitomized this shift. They turned what had once been the pinnacle of defensive weaponry into vulnerable targets, exposing the fundamental flaws in relying solely on static fortifications for battlefield dominance. The impact of these developments extended far beyond the immediate tactical outcomes in Okinawa or Normandy. The advent of the armored engineering vehicles, such as the American M728 combat engineer vehicle and the Soviet IMR series, underscored a paradigm shift in military thinking. These vehicles descended from the pioneering Churchill tanks, equipped to systematically eliminate fortified German MG-42 nests, embodied the concept that no fortification, no matter how well constructed or heavily armed, was invulnerable to specialized assault weapons. The lessons learned from these combat encounters profoundly influenced military doctrines worldwide, emphasizing the importance of mobility and versatility in the face of increasingly sophisticated defenses. The influence of these innovations persisted long after the war's end, shaping the development of military engineering vehicles across the globe. Every major army, from the Soviet Union to the United States, began designing and deploying specialized vehicles capable of breaching or neutralizing heavily fortified positions. Recognizing that static defenses could no longer guarantee victory, this lineage can be traced back directly to the wartime use of flamethrower tanks and engineering vehicles. An evolution born from the realization that adaptive, mobile weaponry was essential for overcoming entrenched and seemingly impregnable defenses. In the final analysis, the impact of the armored assault vehicles, particularly those equipped with flamethrowers and engineering tools, extended beyond their immediate battlefield successes. They fundamentally altered the strategic calculus of fortified defenses, proving that no position, no matter how formidable or well-defended, was invulnerable to a well-planned, technologically advanced assault. The reliance on fixed, heavily armed defensive positions, exemplified by the German MG-42, had created a critical vulnerability, a false sense of security that was ultimately exploited by these specialized armored tools. Their deployment marked a turning point in military history, transforming the nature of defensive modern military strategists, and historians continue to revisit the Normandy campaign as a quintessential example of how specialized warfare, driven by innovative technology and tactical ingenuity, can turn the tide against seemingly impregnable defensive fortifications. This pivotal chapter in history vividly demonstrates that technological breakthroughs, combined with adaptive tactics, can overcome even the most formidable of defenses. However, it is essential to remember that the lessons learned during these intense battles came at an enormous human cost. Costs paid in blood along the beaches of France, across the vast Pacific Islands, and throughout countless other theaters of conflict. These sacrifices serve as a somber reminder that progress in warfare should never be disconnected from the profound human suffering involved. Decades after the conflict, veterans who served in the German 63rd Infantry Division, known as the 352nd, consistently cited the appearance of specialized armored vehicles, notably the Assault Vehicle Royal Engineers, AVRES, as the defining moment that signaled the imminent failure of the Atlantic Wall. One veteran vividly recalled, "We had been told that our concrete bunkers could withstand anything. Our machine guns, the MG-42s, were supposed to cut down invading forces as easily as wheat is harvested. We believed our defenses were impenetrable. But that belief was shattered the moment these new tanks with their peculiar short-barreled guns appeared on the battlefield. These AVRES, equipped with specialized demolition capabilities, proved capable of destroying fortified positions that had taken months, sometimes years, to construct. The very concrete bunkers, once thought to be invincible, exploded like fragile paper, their sturdy appearance betrayed by the devastating firepower of these innovative vehicles. For many soldiers, this moment marked more than a tactical setback. It was a psychological catastrophe. The confidence they had placed in their well-prepared defenses crumbled instantly, fundamentally altering the course of the battle. Some experts argue that this psychological blow may have been the most significant contribution of the AVRES, as they not only destroyed physical fortifications, but also shattered the will to resist, thereby accelerating the collapse of German defenses and aiding Allied victory. Meanwhile, in Italy, the soldiers fighting alongside German forces in the Gothic Line, belonging to the Italian Social Republic, experienced a similarly profound psychological upheaval when faced with the same kinds of specialized armor. Many of these Italian units, unprepared for the destructive power of the Allied tanks, particularly the Churchill tanks they derogatorily nicknamed the Illustrator, chose to abandon their positions rather than face annihilation. These units, which had labored for months in constructing formidable defenses, saw their efforts rendered futile in a matter of moments after witnessing a single AVRE demolish a heavily reinforced stronghold. The accounts preserved in Italian military archives describe a wave of complete demoralization that swept through their ranks. Soldiers realizing that no matter how elaborate their fortifications, they could be breached swiftly and decisively by these new armored weapons. This realization led to widespread surrender, which accelerated the disintegration of Axis forces in Italy and hastened the end of their campaign in the region. On the other side of the Pacific, Japanese forces stationed on Okinawa faced a different but equally intense psychological crisis, despite their cultural emphasis on death before dishonor. When confronted with American flamethrower tanks, vehicles fitted with powerful incendiary weapons, many Japanese soldiers experienced a breakdown of morale that was nearly unprecedented. Numerous reports describe soldiers abandoning their positions in direct defiance of orders, choosing instead to flee rather than face being burned alive. The very thought of these flamethrower tanks, capable of unleashing torrents of fire on entrenched defenders, struck terror into the hearts of even the most disciplined units. This was a form of psychological warfare that transcended conventional tactics, as soldiers perceived these weapons as almost unassailable symbols of death and destruction. The American Chemical Warfare Service documented that the mere appearance of flamethrower tanks often resulted in immediate surrender or mass retreat, with one officer remarking that the psychological impact was worth 10 times the actual casualties inflicted. Entire sectors of the Okinawan defenses would sometimes collapse merely on the rumor of approaching flames, illustrating the profound effect of the psychological element in modern combat. The evolution of military technology during World War II mirrors this dramatic shift in warfare dynamics, exemplified by the transition from the dominance of the MG-42 machine gun to its obsolescence in face of specialized armored vehicles. The MG-42, equipped with a revolutionary roller-locked mechanism and capable of an unprecedented rate of fire, initially seemed to be the ultimate infantry weapon. Its rapid fire rate, combined with its reliability and ease of use, made it a formidable obstacle for attacking forces. However, as the war progressed, the advent of specialized armored vehicles such as the AVRES, Churchill tanks, and flamethrower tanks demonstrated how technological innovation could render even the most advanced infantry weapons vulnerable. This ongoing arms race drove each side to develop increasingly specialized solutions, each response prompting further countermeasures, creating a feedback loop of technological escalation. Ultimately, the Allies' superior industrial capacity and technological. In the year of 1942, there came into existence a machine of remarkable capability, one that, when operated by a single soldier, could dominate vast expanses of the battlefield with astonishing efficiency. This formidable vehicle was designed to tackle the most daunting fortifications and obstacles, wielding a combination of firepower and ingenuity that seemed almost superhuman. Its presence on the battlefield was a game-changer, transforming the way engineers and combatants approach fortified defenses. However, by the time the year of 1944 rolled around, this seemingly invincible machine had become vulnerable, quickly rendered obsolete by a weapon of surprisingly simple design. An antiquated yet effective spring-powered mortar with a spigot mechanism, resembling something that could have belonged to medieval times. This unassuming device, with its straightforward mechanics, managed to neutralize the once feared engineering marvels, turning the tide against what had appeared to be unstoppable. The British 81st and 79th Armored Divisions, following detailed after-action reports from their campaigns in Normandy, documented the destruction of over 342 major German fortifications during the initial month of their operations there. Each of these demolitions often resulted in saving many dozens, sometimes even hundreds of Allied lives by preventing the need for more prolonged and dangerous assaults. This grim yet pragmatic calculus, balancing the costs of developing and deploying specialized vehicles against the lives saved, was a clear testament to the strategic importance of these vehicles, even as German commanders frantically attempted to modify and adapt their tactics to counter the evolving threat. Leading this innovative effort was Major General Percy Hobart, a man whose unconventional ideas initially alienated him from the traditional British military establishment. His bold thinking, however, was ultimately vindicated by the remarkable success of the specialized vehicles he championed, vehicles often dismissed as mere funnies. Despite the credit often being attributed to these machines themselves, Hobart consistently emphasized that the real heroes were the crews who operated them, braving the chaos of battle to bring these unconventional weapons into action. Within the ranks of the British engineers and assault units, crews of these specialized vehicles achieved legendary status, their deeds etched into the annals of military history. One notable example was Sergeant Bill Hawkins of the 26th Assault Squadron, who, on D-Day, managed to destroy no fewer than 7 heavily fortified German bunkers with his Churchill tank fitted with specialized demolition equipment, only to have his vehicle knocked out later by a fierce 88mm anti-tank gun. Another was Lieutenant James Morrison of the 82nd Assault Squadron, who employed his armored engineer vehicle to dismantle the main stronghold at Hillman, an enormous fortified complex that had withstood hours of relentless naval bombardment, yet was eventually brought down by the ingenuity and daring of the assault teams. These men, most of whom were Royal Engineers, volunteering for what was widely regarded as one of the most perilous roles in the entire invasion, understood that their survival depended on their ability to act swiftly and decisively. Their objective was to close the distance rapidly, using their petard mortars and specialized equipment before German anti-tank weapons could respond, creating a deadly dance of seconds where hesitation could mean certain death. Their success hinged on a delicate balance of speed, aggression, and precision, turning what seemed like suicidal charges into tactical triumphs. The German defensive doctrine, honed over years of brutal combat in the vast expanses of the Eastern Front, where the formidable MG-42 machine gun positions had mowed down Soviet infantry in their thousands, proved catastrophically inadequate when faced with these new and unexpected threats. The Germans had relied heavily on static, heavily fortified defenses designed to repel traditional assaults. Yet these proved no match for the innovative assault vehicles that could bypass or demolish their defenses in ways they had not anticipated. This exposed a critical flaw in their strategic planning, the tendency to prepare for the battles of the past rather than anticipate the technological advances of the future. The infamous Atlantic Wall, an enormous defensive barrier constructed along the coastlines of occupied Europe and heavily fortified at great expense and propaganda value as Hitler's seemingly impregnable fortress, was shattered in a single day. When faced with weapons and tactics it had not been designed to resist, this complex network of bunkers, gun emplacements, and barriers crumbled under the relentless assault. The realization that no amount of elaborate static fortifications could withstand the modern mobile form of warfare highlighted a fundamental truth. In the rapidly evolving landscape of the Second World War, fixed defenses were becoming obsolete. Post-war analyses conducted by the German General Staff, many of whom were held in Allied captivity, began to unearth the critical reasons behind their defeat. One of the most significant factors identified was their failure to anticipate and counter the specialized assault vehicles, such as the British Churchill AVRE and similar units. These vehicles had the power to invalidate years of defensive preparation within a matter of hours, transforming formidable positions into death traps for defenders. This analysis marked a profound shift in military strategy. Throughout the tumultuous period spanning the Cold War and extending into the modern era, military engineering doctrines have undergone profound evolution, driven by the relentless pursuit of technological innovation and strategic adaptation. As nations vied for superiority, each major military power developed a suite of specialized vehicles designed specifically to breach and neutralize heavily fortified positions. From the Soviet Union's advanced engineer vehicles, such as the IMR series, to the Israeli Puma combat engineering vehicle, these machines embody a legacy of lessons learned and tactical ingenuity. Each of these vehicles was created with the explicit purpose of overcoming the formidable defenses that defenders often relied upon, illustrating an ongoing arms race between offensive and defensive capabilities. These developments were not born in a vacuum but were deeply rooted in the lessons gleaned from earlier conflicts. The iconic Churchill tanks, for example, played a crucial role during World War II by employing innovative engineering solutions to dismantle German bunkers in fortified positions. The techniques and principles derived from their use, such as the ability to deploy demolition charges from within a protected platform, continue to influence modern combat engineering strategies. Although the technology has advanced considerably, progressing from crude spigot mortars to sophisticated missile systems, the human stories embedded within these technological leaps remain among the most compelling elements in the history of military engineering. Across different theaters of war, countless individual acts of bravery and desperation encapsulate the human cost and ingenuity behind these weapon systems. For instance, German machine gunners, fighting valiantly in their final moments, desperately continued their relentless fire at approaching Allied troops, knowing they couldn't halt the advancing forces. Conversely, British engineers risked their lives to get close enough to German bunkers to plant petard mortars, small but powerful explosive devices, aimed at destroying fortified positions. Meanwhile, Japanese soldiers faced harrowing choices: to burn alive within their defenses rather than surrender, or to abandon their positions, which they had sworn to defend to the very end. These personal experiences, captured vividly in memoirs, unit histories, and countless interviews, offer a visceral perspective on how technological innovations dramatically altered the landscape of combat, transforming seemingly secure positions into lethal traps with the simple addition of a spigot mortar mounted on a Churchill tank. The legacy of the MG-42 machine gun, which survived the chaos of the war, exemplifies how a single weapon's design can influence military hardware for decades. Its fundamental mechanism, which allowed for rapid firing and durability, became the blueprint for subsequent weapon systems like the American M60 and the Belgian F&M-AG. This enduring influence underscored the robustness and effectiveness of the MG-42 as a weapon, highlighting its status as a cornerstone of modern machine gun design. However, its story also serves as a cautionary tale, demonstrating the risks associated with over-reliance on a singular tactical approach. The German military's unwavering confidence in the MG-42's dominance led them to craft their entire defensive doctrine around fixed, heavily fortified positions that maximize the weapon's firepower. This strategy, while initially effective, revealed a critical vulnerability. Such positions could be swiftly neutralized by demolitions or specialized engineering vehicles, rendering them obsolete and exposing the flaws in overdependence on static defenses. In the larger context of World War II, the confrontation between traditional, firepower-based tactics exemplified by the MG-42 and innovative engineering solutions embodied by vehicles like the Allied assault vehicle, Royal Engineers AVRE, reflected a broader struggle between conventional military thinking and adaptive, technology-driven approaches. The Germans' doctrinal reliance on fortified positions, which initially seemed impregnable, was challenged by the emergence of specialized vehicles capable of rapidly breaching defenses through demolition and engineering prowess. This pattern recurred throughout the conflict, illustrating a recurring theme: that technological innovation could upend long-standing tactical paradigms. Despite its reputation for tactical brilliance and technological innovation, the German military exhibited a surprising conservatism in its defensive strategies, often clinging to outdated concepts that had proven effective in previous conflicts. As the Allies advanced into Germany in the final stages of the war, particularly during the crossing of the Rhine and the push into the heart of the Reich in 1945, it became evident that German forces had made some adaptations. Their defensive positions had become more dispersed and concealed, moving away from the heavily concentrated bunkers of earlier years. A nod, perhaps, to lessons learned from Normandy. Still, these modifications arrived too late to alter the inevitable outcome of the conflict. By then, however, the industrial might and technological resources of the Allied powers had produced an array of specialized vehicles capable of countering any semblance of static defense. Thousands of these machines, ranging from specialized engineering tanks to mobile demolition units, had been developed and deployed, rendering traditional fortifications increasingly vulnerable. These technological marvels, born from a combination of wartime necessity and industrial prowess, transformed the battlefield into a dynamic environment where no position could remain impregnable for long. The relentless march of innovation, in tandem with the resourcefulness of engineers and soldiers alike, ultimately shifted the strategic balance, ensuring that prepared defenses could be overcome with relative ease by these advanced engineering vehicles. The final units to surrender in May of 1945 included crews operating the formidable MG-42 machine guns, which had endured through the entire span of the war. These units had witnessed firsthand the dramatic evolution of modern combat, from the early days of rapid victories in 1940 and 1941-41 to the devastating defeats that marked the war's final months. For these soldiers, their weapons had once symbolized dominance on the battlefield, only to become relics of obsolescence by the war's end. They had seen their once feared firearms turn from cutting-edge tools of warfare into symbols of a fading era, as new technologies and strategies rendered their tactical value increasingly questionable. The complete transformation of warfare during this period was stark and undeniable. Witnesses could see how military technology and tactics had shifted from the dominance of infantry firearms and entrenched defenses to the dominance of air power, mechanized assault, and innovative weapon systems. The surrender of Japan in August of 1945, following the devastating atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as well as the Soviet Union's rapid invasion of Manchuria, abruptly halted plans for a massive invasion of the Japanese home islands. Such an invasion had been anticipated to be one of the bloodiest campaigns in history, with millions of civilians, many of whom had been extensively trained in the use of bamboo spears and suicide tactics, prepared to resist fiercely. In anticipation of this potential invasion, military strategists had already prepared a vast arsenal of specialized vehicles and weapons designed to break through Japan's formidable defenses. Among these were flamethrower tanks and other specialized armored vehicles intended to turn the tide of battle and overcome entrenched cave defenses and fortified positions. The lessons learned during the bloody campaign on Okinawa, where flame-throwing tanks had systematically burned out intricate cave complexes, destroying entire defensive systems, were to be applied on an unprecedented scale. Some military estimates suggested that these specialized vehicles would have caused the majority of Japanese casualties in the planned invasion, fundamentally altering the nature of close-quarters combat. When analyzing the failures of German, Japanese, and Italian forces against the formidable advances of Allied specialized armor, certain patterns emerge that highlight common weaknesses. These include an overconfidence in fixed defenses, an inability to adapt swiftly to emerging threats, and the psychological breakdown experienced when soldiers realized that their supposedly impregnable positions offered little real protection. These lessons continue to influence modern military thinking, serving as cautionary tales for contemporary strategists. The recurring theme across these conflicts is that static defenses, no matter how elaborate, can be rendered ineffective when faced with innovative assault technology. The tragic fate of MG-42 crews who died defending bunkers during Normandy, Japanese soldiers who perished in their caves on Okinawa, and Italian troops who abandoned their positions along the Gothic Line, all share a fundamental misconception. They believed that superior defensive firepower and robust fortifications could reliably withstand innovative attack methods. They failed to anticipate the relentless adaptability of their enemies, whose technological advances continually outpaced defensive measures. Today, as military forces worldwide confront new challenges, ranging from unmanned drones and precision-guided munitions to cyber warfare, the story of how seemingly simple innovations defeated formidable defenses remains profoundly relevant. The example of how the Flying Dustbin, or the Churchill AVRE, overcame the MG-42 in the chaos of D-Day serves as a potent reminder. No defensive system is invulnerable. Success on the modern battlefield depends on relentless innovation and the capacity for strategic adaptation. The next great victory will belong to whoever develops the technological equivalent of the AVRE for their era, an advanced tool capable of overcoming new and unforeseen obstacles. The concrete bunkers of Normandy, now preserved as historical sites and memorials, stand as enduring monuments not only to the bravery of the soldiers who fought there, but also to the power of inventive thinking in overcoming seemingly insurmountable challenges. These remnants serve as poignant lessons for future generations, illustrating that even the most formidable defenses can be breached with ingenuity and determination. This enduring lesson remains as relevant today as it was on June 6, 1944, when the first Churchill AVR effectively eliminated a MG-42 nest using a flying dustbin, a symbol of how creative engineering can turn the tide of war in moments of crisis.